What is up, Bruins Nation here with another video. Today I'm going to be doing my Stanley Cup playoff predictions. So let's get started. Okay, one thing I want to say about the seeding in both conferences. So the number one seed, I think, in the Eastern Conference will be Tampa Bay. I think that Boston has a really good chance at getting up there, but I think Tampa Bay's youth will just have a slight edge over Boston. So Tampa Bay will take the number one seed, with Boston coming out close to number two, and then Washington staying at third and Philadelphia staying at fourth, which was their pre-pause positions. In the Western Conference, I think it will stay exactly the same. St. Louis staying in the number one seed, Colorado in the number two seed, Vegas in the number three seed, and Dallas in the number four seed. Okay, so starting off in the first qualifying round, in the Eastern Conference, we have Toronto versus Columbus. So I think this is going to be a pretty interesting matchup. Columbus got decently deep last year, as Toronto lost to the first round. So I think in the end, Columbus is going to pull away and move on to the first round of the Stanley Cup playoffs. Next up, we have Pittsburgh versus Montreal. And I think Pittsburgh, just in every aspect, has the edge. They have a better goaltending. We have Tristan Jarry. They have better offense with Crosby and Malkin leading the way. And they have better defense and just a better overall team. So I think Pittsburgh Penguins will move on to the first round of the Stanley Cup playoffs. Next up, we have the New York Islanders versus Florida. I think that the Islanders have a decent chance with people like Matthew Barzal, but I think Florida has more star power, and I think Florida is going to pull away and move on to the first round of the playoffs. Lastly, what I think is the most interesting matchup in the entire Eastern Conference, we have the Carolina Hurricanes with the New York Rangers. I think that Carolina, they got very deep last year. They got to the conference final. But I think that New York, with Henrik Lundqvist, maybe his last year, will have a lot of hope and motivation. And I think that New York will be able to pull away over Carolina with people like Artemi Panarin on offense, Jacob Trouba. He's okay, but I think that Lundqvist and the rest of the Rangers will be able to move on to the first round. In the Western Conference, the first matchup, we have Calgary versus Winnipeg. I think that this is going to be very interesting since both of these teams have had mediocre seasons. And I think Winnipeg, in the end, will move ahead because they have more goaltending and star power with Hellebuck in goal versus Talbot. And they also have lots of forward power. Nikolaj Ehlers, Kyle Connor, Blake Wheeler. I think they'll just outnumber Calgary. They'll douse the flame, that's for sure. And Winnipeg will move on to the first round of the playoffs. Next up, we have Edmonton versus Chicago. And I think that Edmonton is just going to completely steamroll Chicago. Chicago definitely on a downfall with people like Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews definitely on their way down. And I think that Edmonton, who just has had a much better season with McDavid, Draisaitl, and Yamamoto, will pull away and move on. Next up, I think this is one of the most interesting matchups in this conference. We have Vancouver versus Minnesota. I think that these are both okay teams, but I think that Vancouver wins in almost every aspect. They would definitely win in goaltending with Jacob Markstrom and Thatcher Demko. On the blue line, they have people like Quinn Hughes. And on offense, they have people like Pedersen and Toffoli leading. And they'll just outnumber Minnesota. Lastly, in the qualifying round of the Western Conference, we have Nashville versus Arizona. I think that this could go both ways, both being some of the worst teams that barely made it in. But I think in the end, Nashville will pull away with better defense, but I could see this going both ways. Because Arizona might have the edge with people like Darcy Kempfer in goal. Okay, moving on to the first round of the playoffs. In the Eastern Conference, we have Columbus, definitely, I don't think Toronto. We have Columbus versus Tampa Bay. I think that Tampa Bay is just overall a better team, and I think will be powered from last year and will not make sure there's no repeat and pull away from Columbus. I think Boston versus Pittsburgh. I see Pittsburgh having a burst of energy, but Boston is just a more good all-around team, especially with defense and goaltending, and I think Boston will move on to the next round. Next up, we have Washington versus Florida. I think Florida will put up a good fight, but Washington with veterans like Ovechkin, Oshie, with lots of experience from past playoffs, will be able to get the edge on Florida and move on. Lastly, we have the Philadelphia Flyers versus the New York Rangers. I think that New York is going to come in with a lot of motivation with Lundqvist, like I said earlier. But I think Philadelphia has been steamrolling it right before the pause, and I think they'll be able to keep that up and move past the Rangers. In the Western Conference, we have a repeat of last year. We have Winnipeg versus St. Louis. I think Winnipeg can put up a good fight, but they're nothing to St. Louis with people like Alex Pietrangelo and Binnington. Next up, we have the Colorado Avalanche versus the Edmonton Oilers. I think Edmonton has pretty even offensive power because they have McDavid, Draisaitl, Yamamoto versus Rantanen, McKinnon, and Landeskog. But I think Colorado, just being the better seed in the conference, will be able to move on to the second round of the playoffs. Next up, we have the Vancouver Canucks versus the Vegas Golden Knights. I think this will be very interesting, and I think in the end, this might get some people interested, but I think Vancouver actually will be able to move past Vegas and move on to the second round of the playoffs, just because I just think they have a better all-around team and better goaltending, especially with Markstrom. Lastly, in the conference, we have the Nashville Predators versus the Dallas Stars. And this is going to be a great matchup with the two rivals facing off in the first round of the playoffs. And I think in the end, Dallas will be able to beat Nashville and move on to the next round. Moving back to the Eastern Conference, we have Tampa Bay versus Boston. I think this is going to be a very good matchup, and I think that although Boston being my favorite team, I think Tampa with a better young core will be able to move on to the second round. Next up, we have Washington versus Philadelphia. I think that Washington will put up a good fight, but Philadelphia, just with a better young core and better goaltending with Carter Hart, with Braden Holtby on the steep decline, will be able to move on. In the Western Conference, we have St. Louis versus Colorado. I think Colorado will be good, but I think St. Louis, just with better goaltending against Grubauer and Francouz, with Binnington and Allen, will be able to beat Colorado and move on. Next up, we have Vancouver versus Dallas. And I actually have a lot of faith in Vancouver. And I think Vancouver will be able to move on to the third round in a way, second round of the playoffs. Okay. Moving back, we have Tampa Bay versus Philadelphia, battling for the conference championship. And I think in the end, Tampa Bay will pull away and be the Eastern Conference champions. I think that they just, like as I've said before, both have similar young core. But I think Tampa, with more experience, with star power of Kucherov and Stamkos, which is Giroux and people like Couturier, will be able to move on to the Stanley Cup final. In the Western Conference, we have the St. Louis Blues versus the Vancouver Canucks. And I think this will be a good battle, but I think in the end, St. Louis will be able to fight back like last year and move on to the Stanley Cup final with a chance to win 2 Stanley Cups in a row. I think that in the Stanley Cup final, St. Louis and Tampa Bay will put up an epic fight. And I think in the end, the 2020 Stanley Cup playoffs champion will be Tampa Bay. I think it will be Tampa Bay because I think they'll have more momentum than St. Louis, since St. Louis won it last year. So Tampa Bay will have more motivation to beat them. Thanks guys always for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to drop a like on the video and subscribe for more content coming out soon. As always, this stuff in the video is all speculation, and I do not expect all of this to come true. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you next time.